Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, the philosopher of emotion. He's remembered as a musical genius, but Tchaikovsky was also a philosopher of the heart. Born in 1840 in Votkins, Russia, his letters and diaries reveal a man who thought deeply about the relationship between truth, beauty, and suffering. Forced by law and custom to hide his sexuality, he lived torn between desire and duty, between artistic honesty and social expectation. That tension became his philosophy. Through feeling, we see our most human self. His symphonies and ballets, Swan Lake, The Nutcracker, Symphony No. 6, Pathétique, all wrestle with the idea that beauty is inseparable from pain. He once wrote that art exists to explain life, and he did so through sound, translating private torment into universal language. In a world that demanded silence about who he was, Tchaikovsky made his feelings audible to millions. He wasn't only scoring music, he was arguing that emotion is a kind of truth, as rigorous and noble as logic. His work's endurance proves the point. Across time and stigma, his melodies still teach the lesson he lived, that honesty of feeling is the bravest form of philosophy.
Simone Weil, the saint of compassionate thought. Born in 1909 in Paris, Simone Weil was a teacher, mystic, and moral philosopher whose life burned at both ends. Often described as the most spiritual mind of the 20th century, she combined radical politics with intense empathy. She worked in factories to understand workers' suffering, joined the Spanish Civil War, and lived her philosophy so literally it destroyed her health. Weil formed deep emotional bonds with women and resisted traditional labels, treating love as a cosmic force that transcended gender. She believed true goodness meant attention, seeing others completely, without ego. To her, compassion was an act of metaphysical insight. When we perceive another person's pain, we touch the divine. Her writings, especially Gravity and Grace, blend philosophy, mysticism, and social critique. 15 centuries after Plato, she argued that salvation begins not in belief, but in attentive love. Weil died in 1943 at only 34, likely from self-starvation while sharing rations with soldiers during World War II. Yet her brief life left an enduring moral map, that empathy is the purest form of intellect. She turned philosophy into conscience and proved that thought, at its highest, is an act of love.
Plato, the poet of love and the mind. A student of Socrates and ancestor of almost everything we call Western thought, Plato, 427 to 347 BCE, was obsessed with one central question: how do we move from desire to truth? In his symposium, he staged a philosophical banquet where men, including Socrates, debated the nature of love. There, he described a ladder of passion rising from physical attraction to pure contemplation of beauty itself. That vision turned same-sex affection into something cosmic. To Plato, loving another man wasn't about indulgence. It was about recognizing the divine spark of wisdom mirrored in him. Each true friendship was an apprenticeship for the soul. In that sense, his idea of platonic love was never cold. It was eros, refined by thought. Plato founded the Academy, the first great school of philosophy, where scholars sought truth, geometry, virtue, and often deep emotional companionship. His works remind us that reason and feeling were never enemies. They were partners climbing the same ladder. Through that synthesis of intellect and desire, Plato made philosophy not just a way to think, but a way to love the beautiful.
Epicurus, the philosopher of simple joys. Born in 341 BCE on the island of Samos, Epicurus built an entire philosophy around one radical claim: happiness isn't sinful, it's the point of life. He taught that pleasure, friendship, and freedom from fear were the highest goods. Unlike many philosophers of his day, he welcomed women and men equally into the garden, his small, intentional community outside Athens, where they practiced moderation, mutual respect, and emotional honesty. Epicurus's teachings quietly defied social norms and possibly embraced same-sex relationships without shame. For him, love between companions, whatever its form, was one of life's purest pleasures because it grew from trust and understanding, not from power or greed. His philosophy stripped life of superstition. Death, he said, is nothing to us. Only fear makes it terrible. Real peace comes from choosing kindness, eating simply, and resting among friends whose affection keeps anxiety away. Though later Christians painted him as a hedonist, Epicurus was really a minimalist sage, the original advocate for mental health and serenity. His message endures in every calm heartbeat of wisdom, that to live well, we need not wealth or fame, only honest love and a tranquil mind.
Hypatia of Alexandria, the last light of the ancient world. In the glittering but perilous city of Alexandria, around 370 CE, Hypatia rose to fame as the world's first recorded female philosopher and mathematician. Head of the Neoplatonic school, she taught astronomy and ethics to students of every faith. Her brilliance and independence made her a symbol of intellectual freedom in an era tightening under religious dogma. Hypatia rejected marriage, lived austerely, and fostered mentorships built on mutual respect and passion for truth. In her lecture hall, she fused reason with moral courage. "Reserve your right to think," she told students, "for even to think wrongly is better than not to think at all." Her fame drew suspicion from zealots who feared a woman commanding such authority. In 415 CE, she was murdered by a Christian mob, an act that marked the symbolic end of classical antiquity. Yet her legacy thrived for centuries, inspiring generations of scholars and feminists as a martyr of wisdom over ideology. Hypatia taught one timeless lesson. When knowledge and compassion walk hand in hand, even death cannot silence the voice of understanding.
Michel de Montaigne, the philosopher of friendship and honesty. Born in 1533 in southwest France, Montaigne retreated to his tower library and invented something entirely new, the personal essay. His goal was simple, yet revolutionary: to understand the human condition by examining himself, unvarnished. In his essays, he explored friendship, death, sexuality, and the limits of certainty. His writing about his dear friend Etienne de la Boétie remains among the most tender celebrations of male love in Renaissance literature. Montaigne's mastery was his candor. He admitted frailty, doubt, even contradiction, showing that wisdom comes from embracing humanity, not pretending perfection. He refused dogma, trusted experience, and believed tolerance was the foundation of decency. By giving voice to the inner life, he made introspection itself a philosophical act. Montaigne's quiet courage still feels radical: to live truthfully, to write as you are, and to let friendship stand equal to philosophy. He showed that self-knowledge isn't selfish, it's the gateway to empathy. Francis Bacon, the mind that measured the world. Born in 1561, he transformed curiosity into method. He proposed that knowledge should advance through observation and experiment, not blind tradition, a vision that became the foundation of modern science. Behind the statesman's exterior, letters suggest affection for his male servants and companions, reflecting both secrecy and tenderness. Bacon's life embodied the tension between public service and private identity in an intolerant age. His philosophical work, Novum Organum and the Advancement of Learning, called for intellectual honesty, patience, and fearless inquiry. He believed studying nature was a form of worship, truth the highest charity. If Montaigne taught introspection, Bacon taught verification.
trust evidence, not authority. The world we live in, from vaccines to voyages of discovery, grows from that mindset. He turned knowledge into a disciplined compassion for reality, proving that to understand the world is the most generous act of love the mind can perform.
Jeremy Bentham, the radical of reason and rights. Born in 1748 in London, Jeremy Bentham was the soft-spoken genius who redefined morality in mathematical terms. His principle was clear: the best action is the one that creates the greatest happiness for the greatest number. It sounds simple, but it revolutionized ethics, law, and political theory. But Bentham's genius went even deeper. In private writings kept hidden for a century after his death, he argued passionately for the decriminalization of homosexuality, calling punishments for same-sex love the most absurd barbarities. In the 1780s, long before any public tolerance existed, he defended same-sex relationships as natural and harmless, believing pleasure and consent were sacred personal freedoms. He poured his life into logic and humanitarian reform, prisons, education, animal welfare, and equality. He even requested his own preserved body be displayed as an auto icon, a final eccentric gesture celebrating reason over superstition. Bentham proved philosophy could serve common happiness, not just abstract truth. He transformed ethics into empathy at scale, arguing that rational kindness is the highest form of justice.
Karl Heinrich Ulrichs, the first to speak his name, born in 1825 in rural Germany, Ulrichs trained as a lawyer but became the first person in history to publicly identify himself as homosexual and defend it as natural. In 1867, at a law conference in Munich, packed with scholars, he stood up and delivered what's now considered the world's first coming-out speech, a trembling but fearless plea for dignity. He coined the term earning for men who loved men, calling them a third gender formed by nature itself. At a time when silence meant survival, Ulrichs chose visibility. His essays, written under pseudonyms, argued that love between men was as innocent and divine as between men and women. Though ridiculed and exiled, he kept publishing, writing that truth would one day overcome ignorance. He died in 1895 in Italy, poor but unbroken, his grave marked with the Latin words, ex contrario vivit lux, from opposition light shall live. Ulrichs' courage cracked open a future no one dared imagine. Every modern conversation about LGBTQ+ rights stands on the ground he cleared by saying first, we exist and we are natural.
Friedrich Nietzsche was a quiet Swiss-German scholar who detonated Western philosophy. He demolished easy morality, famously proclaiming, God is dead, yet his words pulsed with longing for human authenticity. Though his sexuality remains debated, Nietzsche's emotional correspondence and solitary life reveal an intensity of affection and repression that echoes the struggles of many queer thinkers. Far from celebrating despair, he urged people to embrace life completely, even its suffering, through his concept of the Übermensch, the one who transcends guilt and fear to create new values. He wrote without pretense, often while hiking mountains alone, crafting ideas that sounded like thunder in prose. Works like Thus Spoke Zarathustra and The Gay Science challenge people to reinvent meaning personally, not inherit it passively. For Nietzsche, philosophy wasn't armchair theory. It was transformation. Become who you are, he urged. 6 words that still ring as both challenge and liberation. In that call lies his true legacy, freedom through self-creation, even when the world refuses to understand.
Oscar Wilde, the philosopher of aesthetic courage. Born in 1854 in Dublin, Oscar Wilde was far more than a wit with perfect timing. He was a moral philosopher disguised as a dandy. Through plays, essays, and his novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, he taught that beauty and art are not luxuries, but the ultimate expressions of truth. To reveal art and conceal the artist, he wrote, is art's aim. Yet his own life made that separation impossible. Wilde's belief in pleasure, honesty, and individuality clashed violently with Victorian hypocrisy. His relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas sparked a trial for gross indecency in 1895, sending him to prison for 2 years hard labor. There, he wrote De Profundis, a haunting meditation on love, shame, and spiritual growth that reads like modern existential therapy. After release, he lived in exile and poverty, insisting still that the aim of life was not conformity but imagination. Wilde's eloquent suffering turned conversation about sexuality into conversation about human dignity. He died in 1900, but his laughter and defiance outlived every critic. He proved that joy and rebellion are two sides of the same truth.
Ludwig Wittgenstein, the architect of meaning. Born in 1889 in Vienna, might be the most intense philosopher who ever lived. He wrote 2 books separated by a lifetime of solitude. Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, a crystalline map of logic, and Philosophical Investigations, which smashed that same map to pieces. Wittgenstein's private letters showed deep affection for men and the loneliness of constant self-examination. His life was one long argument with himself, between silence and speech, purity and guilt. He served as a soldier in World War I, gave away his inheritance, taught villagers, then returned to Cambridge to challenge every theory of knowledge and language. His central insight? Words don't mirror reality, they make it. Truth lives in use, not abstraction. That single idea changed modern philosophy, linguistics, and psychology. Wittgenstein never sought fame, he sought clarity. To him, philosophy was therapy, the discipline of correcting how we think so we might live honestly. Every sentence he wrote feels carved from struggle. His life whispered his best lesson. Language limits us, but love gives it meaning.
Michel Foucault, the archaeologist of power and pleasure. Born in 1926 in Poitiers, France, Michel Foucault reshaped how the modern world understands itself. Openly gay and intellectually fearless, he examined how every society defines sanity, morality, and sexuality, revealing that power hides inside our ideas of normal. His works Discipline and Punish, The History of Sexuality, showed that knowledge and control evolved together. Prisons, hospitals, schools, and even love affairs mirror systems of surveillance and conformity. Yet instead of despairing, Foucault urged freedom through awareness. Living through the early days of the AIDS crisis, he embodied philosophical courage, teaching, loving, and writing until his death in 1984. His openness made him a global symbol of intellectual honesty about sex, health, and identity. Foucault's legacy is empowerment. By studying how institutions define us, he handed people the tools to define themselves. His message, still urgent today, is that truth is never neutral and that understanding how power works is the first step toward being free.
Simone de Beauvoir, the architect of freedom. Born in 1908 in Paris, she was the fierce intellect who turned existentialism into a call for liberation. A writer, traveler, and lifelong partner of Jean-Paul Sartre, she rejected conventional roles in both love and thought, forming deep emotional and romantic bonds with women as well as men. Her book, The Second Sex, 1949, shattered centuries of myth by declaring, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. In one stroke, she exposed gender as a social construct, a radical seed that would bloom into modern feminism and queer theory. De Beauvoir's life matched her words. She lived boldly, asking how to live authentically when society has already written your script. To her, freedom meant taking responsibility for your choices, and love meant recognizing the other person's freedom as equal to your own. She died in 1986, buried beside Sartre, her ideas still unmatched in clarity and courage. De Beauvoir proved that philosophy could be lived day by day, and that freedom, once claimed, must include everyone.
Judith Butler, the thinker who rewrote identity. Born in 1956 in Cleveland, Ohio, Judith Butler transformed how the world talks about gender.
In their 1990 book, Gender Trouble, Butler argued that gender isn't something we are, it's something we do. A series of performances repeated until they look natural. That single insight untied centuries of rigid thinking. Their work fused philosophy, politics, and compassion. Drawing on the traditions of Hegel, Foucault, and de Beauvoir, Butler showed that identity is fluid, and that categories like male-female or gay-straight are social scripts we can rewrite. They extended these ideas in Bodies That Matter and leader writings on ethics and nonviolence, asking how vulnerability and mutual care could reshape power itself. Beyond academia, Butler became an activist voice for LGBTQ+ rights, Palestinian solidarity, and universal human dignity. Calm, gentle, and relentlessly curious, they turned abstract theory into a moral toolkit for ordinary life. Judith Butler's idea exploded globally because it felt like truth people already sensed but hadn't yet named. That being yourself is not deviation from nature, it's creation in motion. They remind us that the most revolutionary act is to live visibly, kindly, and without apology.